Today we're going to talk about Republicans' dangerous new voter suppression law in Georgia and my interview with Senator Amy Klobuchar, where we discuss the filibuster, including how her own position evolved on it and whether she can help convince the Democratic holdouts to follow her lead, passing the For the People Act, the spate of recent shootings, and even how her relationship is doing with her campaign rival Pete Buttigieg. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. So it took only 8 weeks after Joe Biden was sworn in for Republicans to codify the backlash to Georgians electing Democrats to the Senate and presidency. The state legislature has passed and the governor signed into law SB 202, which I'm sure if you've heard anything about it, you know that it makes it illegal to hand out food or water to people standing in line to vote. Think about that. It's now illegal to give water to voters waiting on lines as long as 11 hours. Lines that were intentionally created by Republican policies purposefully targeting black precincts. And here's how you know those policies target black people. Because the average wait time in Georgia after polls were scheduled to close was 6 minutes in neighborhoods that were 90% white and 51 minutes in places that were at least 90% non-white. And so when you make it illegal to give people water who are waiting in long lines, who's that going to impact? Who are the people who are going to need water? The people at white precincts who are waiting average 6 minutes, or those in non-white precincts where they're waiting 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours. If you're wondering whether it's intended to be racist, the data clearly bears that out. Every step of the process is deliberately crafted to make things difficult for minorities because they overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. So when you hear people say that this is Jim Crow 2.0, it's because these policies still, in 2021, target who else but predominantly black people. And of course, the law does plenty more beyond making it illegal to just hand out food or water. It allows any individual to file unlimited challenges to the eligibility of voters. It limits the number of drop boxes. It applies voter ID laws to mail-in ballots. It creates a fraud hotline so that people can issue anonymous tips about what they suspect may be fraudulent behavior, which, man, I would not want to be that call center. But finally, here's the most insidious provision of the law. So normally, election issues in Georgia are adjudicated by county boards of election. But now, the state board of elections can simply decide that these county boards aren't performing well, and they can replace the entire county board with an administrator that they choose at the state level. But it gets worse because the General Assembly, which is Republican-led, also now has more control over that state board. For example, they've removed Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger from his role as chair and member of the five-person board, since he refused to humor Trump's bogus stolen election claims in the last election. And instead, the Republican-led state legislature now gets to appoint the third member of the board, meaning they'll have control over the majority of that five-person board. In other words, the Republican state legislature now has full power to decide whether or not certain ballots will be disqualified if they decide that there was fraud. So whereas they cried fraud in Fulton County, which is home to Atlanta, in 2020, and nothing could be done because there were barriers put in place to protect voters, Republicans have effectively made themselves the gatekeeper to those barriers now. The same people who were clamoring to arbitrarily disqualify votes just because the Republican didn't like that people were voting for the Democrat, now they'll have the chance to do exactly that. If you want to know why S1 or HR1, basically the same bill, the For the People Act, is necessary, this is why. So when you hear Republicans hyperventilating about HR1, it's needed because of them. It's because of this very bill in Georgia. We wouldn't need HR1 if Republicans didn't create a need for it. The bill focuses on partisan gerrymanders and reverses voter suppression efforts, along with reforms to campaign finance and election security and ethics. Stop gerrymandering and you won't need a bill to ban partisan gerrymanders. Stop purging voters from the rolls and eliminating drop boxes and making it harder to register, and you won't need a bill to reverse all of those things. If Republicans had the sense just to not be so shamelessly anti-democratic, the entire country wouldn't be mobilized in favor of HR1. But because they can't help themselves, because they so brazenly tried to grab power, well then suddenly it's necessary. So when HR1 passes, however Democrats ultimately get it to pass, Republicans have themselves to thank. So look, thank God Donald Trump was defeated, but the reason Trump was defeated is because we had an infrastructure in place to prevent elections from being stolen. What Republicans are doing right now is systematically dismantling that infrastructure. All because that party is so incapable of winning an election on the merits, incapable of having a single idea worth selling. And so instead, their only option is just to rig the game. Instead of winning over the people they lost, they're just stopping them from voting instead. I will say this until it stops being true. The Republican Party fundamentally does not believe in democracy. And by the way, that's a point that Stacey Abrams has made time and time again.
We can win because we never stopped fighting. And that's the piece that I hope people hold on to. We practice democracy. And if we keep practicing, we get better and better at it, and more people can join us. And that's how we will never defeat suppression, because suppression is the lazy man's way of winning an election. If you can't win honestly, push people out of the game, change the rules. We can't stop them from being bad, but we can make ourselves better.
Consider, too, what these Republican officials are doing by passing bills like this, always under the pretense of election security and election integrity, is validating the big lie, the debunked, disproven, discredited, disgraced idea that the election was stolen or that there was widespread voter fraud. They are negatively reinforcing the worst behavior. Hell, they're validating the insurrection at the Capitol. They're giving those people, those insurrectionists, exactly what they wanted. They wanted to send a message that they wouldn't accept a stolen election, all predicated on a lie, and Republican officials turned around and validated those demands. And so not only are there disgusting implications for voters, mostly voters of color, of course, but now these right-wingers know that all they have to do is commit violence and they get what they want. Like, not only did these Republican officials, these cowardly officials, refuse to condemn the insurrectionists, they gave them exactly what they were looking for. So when it happens again and these Republicans wonder who's to blame, someone should hand them a mirror. But look, these efforts will inevitably be challenged. Mark Elias, the Democrats' top election lawyer, who I interviewed a few weeks back, he's already filed suit on behalf of a few organizations, including the New Georgia Project and Black Votes Matter. And of course, if Democrats can pull it together and reform the filibuster and pass the For the People Act, that would afford states like Georgia federal protections to counter these Republican efforts. But there's one more stopgap, and that is the people. By doing this, Georgia Republicans have just woken up every Democrat in the state. And there is no better way to make sure that someone votes than by trying to prevent them from voting. We've seen it time and time again, from Wisconsin's state Supreme Court race, when Republicans refused to allow vote by mail at the beginning of the pandemic, only to lose that seat by a massive margin, all the way to the state we're talking about right now, the very state of Georgia, where in the 2020 election, voters waited as long as 11 hours in lines expressly designed to stop them from voting. And that state elected 2 Democratic senators and Joe Biden for president. If you try to steal people's rights, they'll work that much harder to get them back. So congratulations, Republicans. You found a way to make sure the entire country was paying attention. And I can promise you, we will always find a way to vote. To listen to my interview with Senator Amy Klobuchar, where we discuss the filibuster, including how her own position evolved on it and whether she can help convince Democratic holdouts to follow her lead, passing the For the People Act, the spate of recent shootings, and even her relationship with Pete Buttigieg, check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel.